Welcome everyone to the Read to Lead Meet the Author series, which is an exclusive opportunity to connect leaders with authors and to meet the minds behind the book and provide a valuable dynamic to our learning. So I'm Sarah. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the founder of Read to Lead, which is all about inspiring leaders to learn and grow together using insightful books and powerful conversations. So I'm joined by Andrew, founder of the ISP and Professor of Sales Leadership and Performance at Cranfield. And so we're very much united on our commitment to help leaders to be the best they can be. And of course, I'm super chuffed and delighted to introduce Matt Dixon, world-renowned sales expert and co-author of the best-selling book, The JOLT Effect, which I have in front of me, of course, and The Challenger Sale and many more. Yep. Cheers, match. And you're a founding partner of the DCM Insights, which is a groundbreaking research on customer behaviour. And you've done a lot of work, obviously, on customer indecision, which is a crucial topic, not just for everyone in the sales industry or the sales profession, but I think leaders everywhere. And you've made such a significant contribution to how we think about sales and our behaviours and techniques. So a bit of a legend, really, Matt. Is that a fair
That
intro?
just means that you and Andy need to get out more often and meet some other people.
Particularly Andy, I'd say.
Oh, probably. Andy's a bit busy with I guess, going through theses, right, of students.
Oh, yeah.
And Andy, by the way, it's wonderful to see you again. I think we met in London many years ago at an ISP event, if I'm not mistaken. So it's nice to see you again.
We did, and you were on Sales TV recently with us as well. So
This is true. Yeah, it's fun.
Do you want to say a few words, Andy, before you, because I know you're going to jump into the audience, but and I'll ask the questions, but if you want to say a few words.
I am. So very quickly, everybody really should know about the Institute. We are the global institute is trying to get sales to be the recognised profession that other professions are. But why are we doing this? Well, we're partnering with Sarah because we think fellows who are part of the Institute and future fellows should have a different experience, a more enriched experience. And one of the things that my own research around sales development and education, which is my specialism, has shown is reflective practice, thinking about things is hugely important. And let's be brutally honest, as sales leaders, we always find time to be busy and not do these things. So if I'm brutally honest, I read the JOLT Effect, the first 2 chapters a year ago, and it was like, and something else comes along. And so I actually was kind of, well, we need to do this. I got the Audible because I'm dyslexic. I sat down with the book, and Sarah didn't believe me. Copious amounts of notes that had been written, and found it one of the most game-changing things I've ever read. And that's why we're doing this with Matt. I am a groupie. I love all of the books that Matt has put together. I think they're absolutely seminal. So I can't wait to just join the audience and listen to this. It's been great to meet you again, and thanks for the opportunity. All I'd say to any fellow looking at this, engage, join next week to discuss this, because that's the really important part, not just the nuggets that Matt's going to share with you today. Brilliant. Over to you guys.
Said.
With that setup, I think I can only disappoint from here on out, Andy.
I doubt it. As academics, we all drool over the number of data points that you've got now, and everyone goes, oh, brilliant, 2.3 billion. So, brilliant. I'll catch up with you again soon, Matt.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks a lot. Okay, let's get started, Matt. So, where to start? I think one of the things I noticed, I always think it's nice to start from a more personal perspective, but one of the things I noticed at the front of your book was the dedication to your family. I thought it was quite interesting. I'll just read it for the purposes of others that maybe haven't read it or seen it. So in it, Matt says, Matt wishes to thank his wife, of course, and his kids, all of whom find it supremely ironic and endlessly amusing that he wrote a book about how to overcome indecision. So what's that about? What's behind that? Because I'm interested to know your personal experience and kind of challenges, and what maybe, you tell me, prompted the book, what impact the book has had on you.
So it's funny, Sarah, I've in my own company, we've got a head of business development and sales, one of my co-founders, and he'll often bring me on sales calls. And well, sometimes he'll ask me what I think about things after the call, and I say, well, maybe here's what I think, but keep in mind, I only write about sales. I don't actually do sales. So I'm a researcher, and I think indecision is much the same for me. I've written about it extensively in the book, as you mentioned, the JOLT Effect, but I wouldn't describe myself as the most decisive individual. So I come from a long line of indecisive people. My mother is extremely indecisive, and so the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as the saying goes. But I found the study of this stuff absolutely fascinating. You know, we brought our own research to bear, but what was so interesting is there are many decades of social science research around what it is that makes people indecisive that we were able to rely upon, and then kind of bring that academic research together with our own research and ultimately produce some actionable guidance for sales leaders, managers, and salespeople.
So on the point about person, it's interesting, isn't it, how we're sometimes attracted to things that we kind of need or we can't do. I don't know, there's probably something in that. Okay, we'll get into kind of the research a bit more. I guess before we delve in, I also read in the preface piece around how COVID created quite a unique opportunity for you in this research. I thought it was really interesting when I read it, so I'm just going to share it in case no one else has. Sure. So, you know, the book talks about the groundbreaking work of Neil Rackman's, which is spin selling. So many of our members will be familiar with that because we've covered that book before. And how it was almost untouchable and unrepeatable due to the resources required to monitor those conversations. Not necessarily the volume, it was the fact that so many pivotal sales conversations happen in the customer's kind of environment or office. So I guess actually attending those or being party to that is quite tricky, costs a lot of money, etc. So literally overnight with COVID, all sales conversations went online, and that presented, I guess, I think you said, a once in a lifetime opportunity to research or to be part of, to record, capture these thousands of conversations and append them. So I guess you were very busy in COVID. It's fair to say. You had a positive purpose at that time. I guess the question is, Matt. You know, given all this research happened at such an unusual kind of one-of-a-kind time, has anything changed since? Like that was 4 years ago, right? What would you say is relevant, or what may have changed since then?
It's a really good question. I think that, hopefully I would say, hopefully this will only ever be a once in a lifetime occurrence where people are locked indoors and everything is taking place on Zoom and Teams and WebEx and these virtual platforms. And I think while those platforms have really revolutionized sales in many respects and increased sales productivity for many organizations and for many individuals, I think the live component was very much a missing one during that period, and I think most sellers are glad to get back out in the field, meeting with customers at client events, at conferences, in the client's office, and so that was, I think, a welcome return to getting out on the road and meeting with folks in their environment. That being said, I think it's a really interesting question if we think about the impact of COVID and kind of where things go from here. I personally, so I'll give you maybe one example from the research, Sarah. So you'll probably recall very early in the book, we say that in our analysis, 2.5 million recorded sales calls that we collected across industry. It was a global sample. And we found that anywhere between 40 and 60% of the average salesperson's qualified pipeline will ultimately be lost to no decision. So just to be very clear, these are opportunities that the salesperson will mark as closed, lost, but tagged as no decision. So this is an opportunity that we've lost or we've closed out in the CRM system. We've taken it out of our pipeline. Maybe we put them into a drip campaign, but we don't really know why. They just kind of evaporated on us. The customer ghosted us, or they went radio silent. They just sort of disappear into the ether, and we never got it wasn't a clear no, but it was sort of a whole lot of nothing that happened. And so that was a surprisingly high number to us as researchers. when we took this out, the book came out in the fall of 2022, and I remember distinctly we were at the Salesforce.com Dreamforce event in San Francisco. It was actually that conference happened the day it launched in 2022, the day the book was released. So we used that as the launch event. It's a big gathering spot for sales leaders from around the world across industry. And so we ran a number of events. We were very busy a few days in San Francisco. And I was surprised the number of folks who were themselves surprised and almost dismissive of that number, the 40 to 60%. And many of them said, I don't think, we've never measured this, but I would be surprised if our no decision loss rate is in fact that high. Fast forward even 6 months later, and I started getting, I would connect with the folks that we'd have a nice conversation about the research. Seems interesting, doesn't really seem like that's our problem. Fast forward 6 months later, those same people I met in San Francisco were saying, this is not our problem, were reaching out to me saying, we just did the analysis and actually our loss rate, no decision loss rate is like 70 or 80%. And so if you look at different segments of the market right now, this problem is really the bane of the salesperson's existence. I think it's actually gotten much worse. And I think in many respects, if you look at the things that create indecision for customers, there are lots of things that cause people to be indecisive, but there are three big ones that we talk about in the book. The first one is that the customer's struggling with too many options, too many choices, and they don't know which to choose. And when you're struggling with what to choose, and if all the options presented to you look attractive, then the safest decision is to choose none of those options because you don't want to be blamed for choosing the wrong one when you can't really distill what is the difference between option A, B, C, and D. The second cause of indecision is an overwhelming amount of information. So when the buyer has to sift through mountains of information, all kinds of different competing perspectives, they become overwhelmed. And what's motivating their indecisiveness is their fear that after they make the decision, perhaps some new piece of information comes to light that makes the decision seem like not such a wise one after all. I'll tell you just a very quick story on that one. I spoke to a company a few months ago that told me they closed. This is a early stage company, and so they were just starting to get into the enterprise segment in their market, and they just closed a 7-figure US dollar deal. It was the biggest deal they've ever closed with an enterprise brand in their target market. So they're thrilled about this. And they beat out a few well-established competitors, big incumbent players, that household names that we would all recognize. It was all great until about a month or two after the deal was signed, the new Gartner Magic Quadrant report came out that showed that this company's offerings were kind of middle of the pack, in that in the eyes of the analysts were inferior to some of the established players' offerings. The buyer, the person who ran point on the buying decision and ran point on the evaluation, the POC, and all these things, was inundated with emails and questions from his colleagues, all of whom were sending him, screenshots and links to the Gartner report saying, "Hey, did you see that the folks we chose, the vendor we chose, Gartner thinks they're kind of meh? Why didn't we talk to these folks? I don't remember we ever talked to those folks. Why did we pass up on the company they said is a leader? I know we wrote them off, but why? Because they're clearly superior in the eyes of Gartner." And it created such a sort of a firestorm inside the client organization that they ended up putting the brakes on the implementation project and going back and talking to the other vendors in order to allay the concerns of the other people around the company who were passing around this report saying we chose the wrong vendor. They ultimately ended up backing out of the deal because the buyer said, "Look, I thought we did a thorough job here. I prefer your technology, but I don't have time or appetite to hold everyone else off at bay. Everyone else is pressing us to go with the established player. It's not worth cashing the political chips and taking all the heat for choosing somebody else. So I'm sorry." So they used an out clause. They got out of the contract. So it's a good example of being surprised after the fact. Then the last source of indecision is the customer's fear that they're not going to get full value from the purchase. And it's not necessarily that they feel like the vendor is going to steal their money. It's more that they look at the ROI projections. They think about the reference customer calls they've done. They look at the case studies on the website. and they just worry that their organization is too dysfunctional to capitalize on the full value of the purchase. And that becomes really daunting for a buyer, even in a complex B2B purchase where there are many stakeholders. There's still one person whose name is on the agreement as the counterparty on the client side. And so they will look at that and they'll get stressed out about the fact that I made a business case to the CFO that your software or your technology is going to drive a 5x improvement in sales productivity. But what if we are only able to get a 2.5 times improvement? And then I have to go and explain why we fell short. And now it's my name associated with that. I need to look like a hero, not like a fool. And if I know that my company is too disorganized, too bureaucratic, too dysfunctional to capitalize on am I really signing up for something that I'm confident we can deliver? So those are three sources of indecision. Now, if we step back and go to your question, Sarah, what's changed? I think all those things have actually gotten worse. These are secular trends. Most vendors are offering more options. In most areas, there is more content today, more white papers, more webinars.
It's almost
more
overselling, isn't it, as well? Like you're promising, you're trying to be so compelling with what the benefit's going to be, but then you're potentially overselling. You're raising the stakes. Right. But do you think there's also a social piece there? You said you combine, some of your work with the social research that generally there's just a feeling of overwhelm as an individual, as a human being. Like growing information.
Absolutely. These are definitely, it's interesting. These drivers of indecision have been documented in a whole range of fields outside of sales. So we in the book reference, I think, some research by Dutch psychologists where they looked at what causes university students to pause before they register for classes at university and choose a course load for their semester or for their academic year. And it was the same set of things. Too many options, too much competing information they had to sift through, and a fear that if I sign up for this course, well, I might pass on another course that might prepare me for graduate school or for my chosen profession in a better way, or maybe I won't like this course and it won't help me accomplish the professional objectives that I have. So these are very common human threads, things that make us indecisive. It's the same thing as, ordering in a restaurant, too many options, too many Yelp reviews or foodie reviews out there on the internet, and a fear that I might order something, but I might look across the table at my friend and wish I had ordered what they ordered instead of getting what I ordered, right?
Yeah, there's a lot just generally of looking out and around, isn't it? Comparisonitis of what you could have, what someone else has got, what you see, and that probably doesn't help either. So do you, so that's since COVID then. What about, since COVID as well, there's AI and digital and technology is always been there, but it's gone significantly a bigger part of the conversation. So where do you think, what impact is that having, would you say, and how do you think that's going to increase?
Yeah, I think AI itself is a perfect microcosm of what we're talking about. So what's interesting is while the amount of ink spilt on Gen AI does not correlate to the amount of Gen AI products that have been purchased by buyers. So if you ask any vendor in this space, many of whom have poured endless resources and money into AI-enabled capabilities, most of them will report back that the uptake has been a lot slower than they expected. So good example is Salesforce. They had their earnings release not too long ago, and they have really gone all in on AI, but the adoption has been slower than they would like, and it's the same for all vendors. Now, I think what's interesting is if you ask the question why, well, if you are an executive or a leader in a company, AI can be transformative, but where do you deploy it? Do you deploy it in sales, in the legal department, managing your supply chain, finance, M&A, HR management? There's a whole range of things, marketing, where you could deploy it. Information. There's way more information, arguably way more information than any one human being could ever consume to get smart on something. And the reality is none of the buyers really understand this technology. They don't know how it works. They don't understand where to deploy it. They don't understand how to deploy it. And most importantly, I think it's expensive. And so this is a big investment. And what if it doesn't pay off? So nobody wants to sign up for making a big transformative purchase for their company and having that not pan out. So I think AI itself, and we're working with a number of companies who are heavily invested in AI-enabled technology, And they are all now looking at JOLT as a way to help. How do I help instill confidence with my customer instead of leaving it to their own devices? Because if I do that, they will sit on the sidelines or straddle the fence, or pick your metaphor. They'll wait until the options becomes very clear, until somebody sifts through the information. Somebody else goes first, right? Nobody wants to be blamed for something going wrong.
Yeah, there's a real buzz about first adopter, but it's a few, right? The reality is everyone wants to feel like we all follow the herd a little bit. Let's talk a bit about that then, when you said about deploying and adoption, because the theory and the JOLT strategies completely stand true. I don't think they can be disputed. They're based on so much research that you've done. I guess what I'm interested to hear a bit more about is the application, particularly with Read to Lead. Our whole ethos is, how do you turn the insights from these books, this theory, into actual action?
Sure.
So tell me a bit about how difficult is it? Like how hard is it to actually apply the JOLT effect within businesses? What's your experience with this application, and what obstacles have you seen people face, and how have they overcome it?
So I think there are two big obstacles. I think and then we can go through and I can give some tactical, here are four, I can think of four immediate things that everyone can go do. They're very quick hit things. But I think the first obstacle is the belief that has been, salespeople have been trained and coached on. This has been drilled into them for years and years and years, that if a customer becomes hesitant, it's because you haven't dialed up the FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. You need to show them the ROI. It's a value question, right? They don't buy it. They don't see your competitive differentiation, or maybe they just are indifferent towards your solution. And what we found in the research is that if you go out and with a customer who is actually convinced of your value, convinced of the differentiation, and thinks this is a top priority, but is experiencing hesitation for other reasons. They don't know what to choose. They're worried they haven't done enough research, or they're worried they might not get what they're paying for. And if you go out and try to dial up the FOMO with those customers, actually it makes it more likely the customer will do nothing. So those techniques, which are age old in sales, actually end up backfiring dramatically. And so what we tell salespeople, and this is the first obstacle to your point, the first thing that makes it hard, is it requires a mindset shift. I'm not saying that overcoming customer indifference is something salespeople should ignore. That's absolutely job number one. If your customer is indifferent towards change, or towards you and your solution, or solving this business problem, or getting after this opportunity, you're never going to have an indecision problem because you haven't overcome the first obstacle.
It's almost like step one, right? But how do you know when you shift from the FOMO to the FOMO?
The FOMO, the fear of messing up. So that's actually, we'll go to on the tactical side, right? That's the first piece of guidance I'll give. But I think the second problem, and this gets again into these tactical recommendations, is overthinking it. Actually, is looking at, we've got to roll out this whole framework, and it's a huge undertaking, and it really isn't. I mean, I think one of the things I always tell sales leaders is, JOLT is not a sales methodology in the same way that maybe Challenger is. Just for instance, it is meant to sit on top of or complement whatever you do as your current go-to-market sales method or approach. Think of it like a fuel additive. It makes the engine run better and more efficiently, and it helps avoid those no decision losses, which are so painful and costly for sales organizations. So JOLT, for the folks here, JOLT is an acronym. It stands for 4 key behaviors, and I'll give you one tactical piece of advice on each of the 4. So J is judging the level of indecision. O is offering your recommendation. L is limiting the exploration, and T is taking risk off the table. On judging the level of indecision, we've got to remember that customers, if you ask your customers if they are indecisive leaders, they will get quite offended. And conversely, if you ask them if they're decisive leaders, they will all raise their hand and say, absolutely, I make the tough calls, I manage from my gut, I'm not scared of taking a chance or a risk. But the data tells a very different story. We actually found that 87% of customers suffer from either moderate or high levels of indecision around purchases. So if you find a decisive customer, somebody who's not worried about failing, it doesn't suffer from FOMO, the fear of messing up, then you should sell them everything and you should do it right away. But 87% of the time, you're dealing with customers who are moderately or deeply indecisive. But how do you get indecision on the table so that it can be assessed, it can be managed, it can be overcome? Well, that requires the customer effectively admitting to something that can be quite embarrassing, right?
Yeah.
Something they're worried about.
I'm going to want to admit to it.
That's right. Now, open-ended questions are a technique that have been taught to salespeople for a very long time. Those techniques don't really work very well here. Instead, what we found in the data is high performers will use something we call a ping, and they'll listen for an echo. And actually, this is not in the book, so some bonus material here. So what high performers will do is they will try to articulate the fear that they think their customer is struggling with, but doing it in a way that doesn't embarrass them or out them, but actually, in fact, makes them feel quite normal for having this concern, and then provides an offer of support. So it might be, Sarah, we've had some great conversations. We did some demos. We had a proof of concept in one part of your business. It was fantastic. I think we all agree. One thing I know is that customers at this stage in the purchase journey sometimes start worrying about the configuration and what should be in the proposal and what should be out. And you told me early on, Sarah, that budget is limited and resources are limited and you can't have everything. So you need to make some principled decisions. And I'm just curious, do you feel like at this point, could you and your team say specifically what you would like to have in the initial deployment and what you are okay waiting for later to implement? If you are not, then I would love to be of service to you and maybe talk to you a little bit about what other customers get value out of as a first step with our platform. If you are clear on what you want, I'd love to hear it because that'll help guide our conversations from this point forward. Now, what you might say is, yeah, to be honest with you, everything you showed us looks great and we can't have it all. And we are struggling a little bit in terms of what should be in and what should be out. We'd love to know what other companies like us do in this situation. Or you might say, no, we were just being polite. There's a lot of things you showed me that we don't like. What we are really worried about is the ROI projection because this is going to go to our CFO and it's got to be believable. So we need to focus on that. So that is a technique. Again, we're trying to articulate the fear and listen for that reflection back. That
You're depersonalizing it, aren't you? You're kind of taking it away from being about them and moving it on to a customer, a
That's
general
right.
situation.
That's right. And customers like you, people tend to get very excited about everything, but they worry about making the wrong decision, and that is totally normal. Everybody suffers from that. That's a big decision. It's an important decision. Let me help. So that's the first one, the J.
Yep.
The second one, offering your recommendation. I think salespeople love to ask questions and they love to let the customer decide what they want. We love offering options to our customers and letting them guide us. But I think what the best salespeople do is they will offer lots of options early on, but over the course of the sale, they're looking to narrow the consideration set, take options off the table, and guide the customer to a specific configuration, a specific version of the platform or the product or the proposal. And the way that they do that is they do, and this is going to sound perhaps a little bit trite, but they do what a wait person would do in a restaurant. So imagine you were in a restaurant and you were looking at a menu and you'd never been there before, and all the entrees are actually quite expensive, but they all look fantastic, and you just don't know what to select. How much value would it be to you is if you ask the wait person, what do you recommend? And if their response was, well, what are you in the mood to eat tonight? Well, that's of no value whatsoever, but that's in fact what most salespeople do. When I, as a customer, start expressing some concern of everything you put in front of me, what do you recommend? And most salespeople go back and say, well, what do you want? What's most important? What are you trying to solve for? Why did you first come up to us at the trade show and sit at our booth? What were you excited about in the demo? What I'm hoping is you'll say something that you will convince yourself of what the right path forward is. What a great wait person in a restaurant does is they say, well, Sarah, this is our most popular dish here. It's the one we run out of it every night. We still have it tonight. It's what we're known for, but it's a big portion. If you're not as hungry, maybe you're interested in something a bit lighter. We have a vegetarian option, which is fantastic. I think it's a kind of a little bit of a dark horse as a secret kind of dish on our menu. But I love that one too. So, but again,
you're almost acting like a credible guide, aren't you?
It's a credible guide. Yeah, that's exactly right.
And I remember with Steve Jobs, he always said, don't ask the customer what they want. You kind of need to guide them and direct them to it.
You need to guide them, and the reason is that you know a lot more about this than they do.
Yeah.
But you live in this space; they do not, and so this may be the only time in their careers they're making this decision. and they're looking to you to provide some guidance and instill some confidence. When a weight person does that, they harness something called the delegation effect, which is it puts a little bit of the burden of a bad decision. It shares the burden between the decider and the recommended, versus if I'm deciding on my own, it's all on me. If I don't like the dish that the weight person recommended, whose fault is that? Well, it's technically my fault, but it's also kind of their fault because they suggested it. And it's a simple consumer example, but we found in B2B sales, big, complex, risky decisions that the best salespeople do exactly that. They act as a trusted guide, to your point.
Brilliant. I love these examples. We're going to have to jump to the, yeah.
Sure,
go to the next, last one.
So I got two more.
Okay,
I'll give you. So L is limiting the exploration. This is all about, customers doing endless amounts of research, more reference calls, more white papers, more they keep kicking the can down the road because they keep wanting to consume more information. This is going to be surprising, I think, for folks, but one of the keys to getting customers to stop trying to be an expert and start trusting you as their expert is that you've got to get them to trust you. And I know that sounds a bit trite as well, but I will tell you tactically what the very best salespeople do right very early on is build a bank of goodwill and trust with the customer, because the customer is thinking, they're coming into this, they don't know you, they do know you're a salesperson, they believe salespeople are paid to hide the bad news, to only talk about the good things, right? And they believe that they're compensated to oversell the customer, sell them more than they need, etc. So what the very best salespeople will do right away is they will be brutally honest with the customer about things that their solution doesn't do, or places where their competitors are better than they are, or where they might not be the right fit for the customer.
Just qualifying them, right?
Disqualifying. In that moment, teaches the customer you're not here to oversell them or put one over on them. You're here to get them to a great decision. And that can make all the difference in terms of getting that customer to stop trying to be an expert and saying, you know what, Sarah?
Yeah.
What should I read? What are the resources I should consume? What should I ignore? Like, I've never done this before. The last piece, taking risk off the table, there are lots of ways to do that. In some industries, we can offer an opt-out or a contract carve-out, but in a lot of segments, that's not a practical tool or vehicle to use. So what we often recommend is, how do you pull forward the vision of getting from signature to value? So, for example, a lot of tech companies, what they're doing is pulling forward their customer success partners before the contract is signed, saying, Sarah, I know we legal and procurement are reviewing this, and we're going to let that run its course. What I'd like to do is start the conversation about going from signature to value and get your customer success manager on the phone so that we can paint the vision of how this is going to unfold over the next 3 months, because it's a simple recipe, and all we need to do is follow it. We want to make sure we customize it to your organization, who should own what parts, how much resourcing will be required, what metrics we're going to track, and what are we going to do if there's any slippage, because what we want to do is make you look like a hero to the CFO, not like a fool.
It shows you're on it, right? And it shows you're kind of painting the path to all the way through, so people there's no surprises.
That's right.
Love it. Some really practical points there. Thank you, Matt. And so you've talked there a bit about how you as a salesperson can kind of implement it. What about if you're a leader of sales team? How can you? What advice can you give them to actually how you can implement the JOLT effect within the team? How you can adopt it into your processes? How you can get people on board with actually those techniques?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, you raised this question earlier about how do you know when it's time to shift gears from trying to win the battle for indifference versus the battle of indecision, right? These are two different steps, two different battles we've got to wage and win as salespeople. And I think for leaders, it's really important to act as a sounding board and a coach to salespeople to help pressure test that they are applying the right techniques to the right customers who are in the right, they understand which battlefield they're on. And I think a lot of times salespeople, because again, they've grown up in this world where they believe that if the customer's not moving forward, it's because they don't see the value. And I've got to turn up the heat. I've got to make them sweat. I've got to dangle a 10% discount in front of them, create the urgency driver. And as we know from the research, those things are useful if the customer is indifferent and they don't see the reason to change, or you haven't answered the why change question. But they actually backfire dramatically when the customer is not concerned about the value. They're concerned about making a mistake. And the reason it backfires is that basically what you're doing is you're using scare tactics to sell to somebody who's already afraid, but they're not afraid of what you think they're afraid of. They're afraid of something else. So now you're just layering fear on top of the fear they've already got. And so sales leaders, sales managers in particular, frontline sales managers, are the crucial kind of pressure testing or sounding board kind of resource for salespeople to understand, how do we know that the customer is sold? At least we built the intent. They're sold intellectually, that they buy the value, they understand our differentiation, they see themselves in our solution, and they know it's a top priority. And what indicators might we have that it's something else holding them up? But really starting to pressure us. Look, there are going to be customers who say to you during a sale, Sarah, you can stop selling to me now. I'm sold. And that's wonderful, because then okay, now it's time to instill the confidence and win the second battle, right? But most customers won't tell you that. And I think that it's important for sales managers to pressure test when the salesperson brings a deal, especially a stuck deal or a deal that seems to be slipping through their fingers, and the salesperson saying, well, I'm going to get them on the phone with another reference customer. I think we do another demo. We should do another POC. Let's send them a discount offer, or let's try to create some urgency or a critical event, that the sales manager at least gets the salesperson to pump the brakes. That may be the right solution, but it may be like the exact opposite of what they should be doing. And without the sales manager there to be a backstop and say, hang on a second, how do we know that that's what's causing the customer to be indecisive or hesitant towards us? How do we know that that's what's causing them to ghost us or go radio silent?
What are some of those metrics then? What are those indicators?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them. So I think a few that I'd mention or suggest. So the obvious one, I think, is if we look at average or standard deviation of on sales cycles, and you start to look at deals that are on the right hand of the deviation, right? They're taking a lot longer than typical. Sometimes that's for good reason. Other times that's an early indicator that this customer, or maybe a late indicator, this customer is actually suffering from FOMO and indecision. There are other ones as well, though. Some companies we've spoken to have done their own analysis, and they've looked at, when we look at no decision losses, what were some of the early indicators that we can pull out of the CRM and out of our own systems? Some surprising ones. So one is when a salesperson reforecasts the close date multiple times.
Yeah.
The other one is when they reforecast the deal size multiple times. We've heard this from a couple of companies. They found that is a good indicator that the customer's kind of, another one I'll share with you that's kind of interesting, technically a little bit more tricky to get after, but a couple of companies we've spoken to have said they will, with a healthy deal that closes as it's expected, they see a cadence of communications between the salesperson and the customer that follows a specific pattern. So it may be every few days or every few days email exchanges that are of a certain length. It may be every week or so a Zoom conversation.
It's
that
indicating
shows
a connection, isn't there? It's
indicating a connection. That's right.
Yeah.
And when things start to peel apart, and actually when you look at the substance of those communications, when they start to get shorter and shorter, right? They're one word or one sentence, I'll respond later, I'm really busy right now. These are early indicators that things are kind of going off the rails and there's something else going on here.
Okay. Matt, I'm going to cut in now to say we probably should go out to the audience and ask some questions.
Sure,
I have so many more to ask. I think we could, thank you for the insight so far. We'll perhaps come back to some, but let's open the floor to the audience. Guys, those listening in, if you want to put anything in the chat with a question for Matt, I can ask it. So we've got one here actually, from Neil.
Yeah.
Do we think that salespeople are too quick to present and tell, whereas JOLT puts the focus back on the client, which is perhaps where the approach works?
Yeah, I think that's true. So from like a psychological point of view, I think the reason that most salesmen, so there are lots of biases that people have. There are two big ones that we have to contend with as salespeople. The first one we've all been well schooled in, which is the customer status quo bias, which is their preference, if you will, or innate desire to do nothing. It's laziness, right? We've all seen this before. We've all seen where we put a really compelling solution in front of our customer, and we know, and in fact, we know, and they know that this will make them better off.
Yeah.
It's indisputable, right? There's no debate about it, and the customer still doesn't move forward. And that is oftentimes for status quo bias reasons, which is they have a propensity towards inertia. They don't like people. It's hard to get people to change, whether it's, changing to healthy eating and exercise habits, or it's getting a customer to buy an expensive solution, or go through a transformation journey with you as a vendor. That's one bias. The other one is what's called the omission bias. The omission bias is not the customer's desire to do nothing. It's the customer's desire to avoid making a mistake. And that is very different. And in fact, of the two, the literature shows it's the desire to avoid making mistakes that actually is more powerful for people than the desire to do nothing. But the problem is, and this goes, Sarah, back to what you said earlier, they manifest in the same exact way. And so when we look at a no decision loss, the knee-jerk reaction, I think, for us as leaders and as salespeople is to assume it was the customer who is content with their status quo. But as you remember from the book, that's true, but it's only true for about 44% of the no decision losses. 56% of the time, they were sold that the status quo is unacceptable and they had to move forward. They were sold intellectually, but they still didn't move forward because of their fear of getting blamed for making a bad decision, because they chose the wrong thing, they didn't do enough research and got surprised later, or they didn't get the ROI they were anticipating. So yes, I do think a lot of it, and I think Neil's spot on, I do think a lot of what's going on with the JOLT effect is this shift perhaps to a more customer-centric approach. I know that sounds like a platitude, right? But we talk about in the book this idea that JOLT sellers, really what they are is they're salespeople, yes, but they're also buyer's agents. Yeah. And I think this is a powerful idea to think about.
Distinction, isn't it?
Yeah, early on, our job is to sell, right? It is to convince the customer that the status quo is unacceptable, that moving forward with you is a much better option, and that this should be a top priority for them and for their business. But once they are convinced of that, our job needs to change from salesperson to buyer's agent. A buyer's agent, their primary job is to instill confidence in the customer. To be a trusted guide, as you said, Sarah, to put their arm figuratively, not literally because that would be creepy, but to put their arm figuratively around the customer's shoulders and say, it's going to be okay. You're making a great decision. You don't need to do all the research because I've done it for you and I'm your trusted guide. And we've got your back. We've done this before. You're not going to look like a fool. You're going to look like a hero. We've underpromised. We're going to overdeliver, and you're going to be a hero in your organization for partnering with us. So that is a shift from telling, I think, as Neil's saying, to more, let me help you and instill that confidence. It's a different dynamic, as Neil's pointing out.
It's that shift from ask to tell, isn't it? Which from tell to ask. Thank you, Matt. So we've got quite a few to run through here. We've got quite a few coming. Neil said, JOLT assumes an active dialogue, but what is Matt's view on ghosting and how to overcome it? Perhaps it's another book.
This is there's a two-part answer to this, I think. One is, and the first part is bad news, I think, which is if you've been ghosted or the customer is no longer responsive to your efforts, chances are that you have done something to earn that response from the customer. And typically what it is that you've been pushing so hard trying to reconvince the customer of the value and the differentiation of your solution, or to create the burning platform. You've been dialing up the FUD and really trying to put the heat on the customer, or you've been throwing these urgency drivers, whether it's a discount or a scarce implementation window, or Sarah, you told me that your boss is looking for you to solve this business problem, and I can't forgive me for saying so, but if you don't move forward, you're not going to solve this business problem. And clearly you agree that we're the partner. So adding this pressure can often result in ghosting. And I think at that point, bridges have been burned with the customer, and it's very hard to recover from that. So I think that's the bad news. But I have heard from salespeople that they've had success when they take this approach of, let me take my salesperson hat off. We've had lots of productive conversations. I think I think we've gotten mutual agreement. Maybe we haven't, but I think we are mutually agreed that the status quo is no longer tenable for you. We are the vendor you should move forward with, and this is a top priority for you. So I want to put all that aside for a moment. What I often see people, though, worry about is implementation risk or adoption or capturing ROI, or did they configure this the right way, or maybe it's the contract length, and or prioritizing different integrations from our vast vendor ecosystem. Whatever it is, throwing out some hypotheses, which is almost like an email-based version of a ping, to say let's put the selling aside for a moment and let me help you. And whether the right decision for your company is to buy from us, to buy from a competitor, or to do nothing at all, I'm kind of indifferent. We've invested enough time here that my main objective is to get you to a great decision. So let's put our solution to the side for a moment. Let's just talk about what the right decision is for you. Those can kind of sometimes get people back engaged.
It's like getting on a level with people, isn't it?
Getting on the level. I think that's very well said. Yeah, I think it's nicely put in.
Trying to meet people where they're at. I think otherwise the dynamic is me versus you, or me at a different level rather than.
That's right. It also protects the relationship too, right? Because sometimes these customers are temporarily hesitant or indecisive, or maybe there's something. Maybe these are what we found in the research. This is interesting. Is that you may have individuals who are normally quite decisive, but there's something else going on in their organization. Maybe they've got some competitive pressure. Maybe they've had a leadership change. Maybe they've just made an acquisition and they've got, and so that.
Or in their life generally can impact.
That's right. In their life generally. Yeah, exactly. And so protecting the relationship where, I understand now may not be the right time, but I'd love to continue the dialogue and be a resource to you. And regardless of the direction you choose to go in, I don't want this to be our last conversation. I'd love to continue the dialogue and be of help to you. But as you said, it's kind of getting on the level with them.
Okay, brilliant. Next, Simon. So Simon says, when using and applying JOLT, how forensic are you in getting a customer to define and accept their business problem and its cost to the business in advance of and or as part of applying JOLT to help sell the solution?
So I think, and hopefully I'm interpreting correctly here, Simon, in terms of how forensic, I guess from a salesperson's perspective, I would say quite forensic, because what you're laying out here is sort of the demarcation line between indifference and indecision. So you've got to get the customer to accept the business problem and the fact that not solving this problem represents a real cost or a real opportunity cost to their business, and that solving this problem is in fact a top priority relative to other opportunities or problems that they could solve for, right? You've got to get it to the top of the list. So getting that acknowledgement or verification from the customer is absolutely paramount, because it's at that point that you understand, okay, now it's time to instill confidence and deploy the JOLT techniques. However, one caveat, that person may be sold, but what happens when they go to a buying committee where their other colleagues are perhaps not sold on those factors? They don't see the need to change. They don't know that your solution is the preferred solution, or they don't accept that at face value, or they don't believe this is a top priority. So there might still be some indifference to be overcome amongst the buying committee, and vice versa. You might have a buyer who, in fact, you've helped manage the FOMO. You've helped instill that confidence. But what happens when they go behind closed doors to the rest of the buying committee and those other individuals are actually concerned with other things that might go wrong? So how do you equip your point person to dial down the FOMO with all the other key stakeholders? So that idea of consensus buying and buying committees adds an additional dimension of complexity here.
Because you're almost preempting it by arming them. You can overwhelm them, can't you? If you're trying to pass the potential barriers off at that point. Okay, conscious of time, so let's jump ahead then to Laura's saying, what is the social science of what makes people indecisive? Yeah, so can you give a bit of a flavour to what you combined it with from a social side?
Yeah, so that's we spoke about this before, but in terms of the social science, all the literature around omission versus status quo bias, and then secondly, those how indecision manifests, what its, if you will, physical markers are, or the observed markers of indecisive behavior, which we talked about a few here: ghosting, going radio silent, hesitation. sometimes what can manifest as procrastination, right? Pushing ideas, kicking the can down the road, or pushing ideas or decisions out, farther out in the timetable. And then what causes those things? So choice overload, information overload, and expectations overload are the three dominant drivers of human indecision. But at the highest level, indecision is a function of our desire to avoid blame and avoid making a mistake.
Brilliant.
But there's more social science.
So many more, isn't there?
There's a lot of psych journal articles cited in the book, and we tried to summarize it as best we could. But you can check out the original sources on that stuff on your own.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. Maybe time for one more.
Sure.
So Ed's asking, what provocative questions can you ask a prospect to get them to change away from the safe option?
Oh, provocative question. So it's to get them to change away from the safe option. So that is, again, I think that is not a JOLT. That's not the JOLT playbook. That's probably, I would steer you more to Challenger. Actually,
out. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you're competing against the safe option or the status quo, then your problem is not indecision. Your problem is indifference, or the fact that they want to go with the safe option. I'm reminded of a story actually along these lines. I ran a session with one of the biggest CRM vendors in the world, a company everyone would know by name. And I was running a JOLT session with them, and one of the sales leaders in the audience said, well, we are the safe option. We are the 800-pound gorilla, if you will. We're the biggest, most dominant player in the space, and we're the highest ranked in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for certain use cases and so on and so forth. So we are the safe option. So this indecision that people and this hesitation seems to be affecting the smaller players, the startups, the early stage companies, those who don't have our brand and in track record and reputation. And I said, that is true that there's safety in your brand, but remember what causes people to be indecisive? Too many choices, too much information, too much risk. So compared to some of those early stage companies, do you offer more options or do they offer more options? Well, clearly you do.
It's more complicated as you get bigger.
Oh,
there's
far more
much
complicated.
More options.
You've got a huge partner ecosystem. You've got all these integrations. You've got all these options. Second, is there more written about you guys or about these smaller companies? Clearly, there's more written about you guys.
Overwhelming information.
Overwhelming information. Risk. You are trying to move up from products to solutions, like multi-year contracts. You're trying to create this whole platform. That is a much bigger decision than buying from a much cheaper, smaller vendor where if you don't like it, you just cancel it and you move on to something else. Going in with your solution is a once-in-a-career decision that your buyers will make, and it's something they're not going to undo. And they know that, and that's what amplifies their fear that they won't get full value. And so again, it requires us to kind of reflect a little bit on, are we really actually the safe option? Or in fact, are we more susceptible to some of those drivers of indecision than others? And I would tell you, a lot of the big incumbent players in most of these industries are actually the ones that are talking to us more about indecision, stalled deals, no decision losses than in fact a lot of the early stage companies.
Yeah, interesting. Neil's saying then perhaps it's also linked a bit to the T in terms of taking risk off the table.
That is a really important one. Neil's just one last thought here, Sarah. Neil's saying on something quite important here. That is the one place where strength of brand I actually think is a benefit, right? Because there's safety here. And there's that feeling the customer has. It's top in the Gartner Forrester report.
It's the trust point, isn't it?
It's the trust point, right? And that can be very powerful. But you got to remember, your solution is probably orders of magnitude more complicated, more resource intensive, and more expensive, and therefore more risky than the smaller competitor's solution. So if the smaller competitor's solution doesn't work out, nobody gets fired for that. If your solution doesn't work out, people get fired.
Wow, Matt. I think we're going to have to wrap it up, but there's endless questions in. Maybe I can ping them over to you separately. There's a few left. You can always respond to them on email, perhaps. So interesting, and so much. You've given us so much to think about. I mean, this point around indifference to indecision, isn't it? And it's kind of the intersection between your Challenger sale book and the JOLT Effect. Like, is there another book coming? Like, what's the next step for you?
I usually have flashbacks after books, but then I, for whatever reason, I'm probably a glutton for punishment. I sign up for another one. So we actually are working on another book.
Once you're over it.
Yeah, right now. So we got a new book. It comes out in the spring from Harvard Business Review Press. It's called, now this is our first industry specific book that we've ever done. So this is written specifically for professional services, what you might call doer sellers. So many of us, I think, on the session today are in the business of selling products or productized solutions. But what if you're selling advice? So if you're a lawyer, you're a consultant, you're a banker, you're
we actually have a lot of consultants on as well. Yeah, that would be really
so this is a very different kind of sale when the person themselves, when you are the product, is quite different. And so we did a bespoke study. We collected data on 3,000 partners in law, accounting, management consulting, investment banking, PR, and advertising, and found some fascinating stuff. We actually profiled this research in the fall issue or November, December issue of Harvard Business Review last year. And then the book comes out next spring. It's called The Activator Advantage. Activator Advantage, what today's rainmakers do differently. And you guys are the first ones to know that. Yeah, I just got the email. I got the email from Harvard, from the editor, and then we just settled on the title literally right before this.
Brilliant. Well, that's an exclusive. Let's get you back, Matt. We'll have to come back and have a chat with us about that because we have a lot of leaders within professional services. So that would be good to.
That would be fun. Yeah.
We've run out of time. So just to wrap it up before everybody jumps off, massive thank you, Matt, for your time. I mean, so much insight there. I could have asked many more questions, and there's many questions. Perhaps, like I said, I'll email them over to you and see if we can circulate them. But I want to say a big thanks, and you've given us lots to think about. In terms of finding out more about the JOLT Effect, I'm going to suggest that people go on to buy the book. We've shared a summary copy. Many do actually read the book, as Andrew said he did too. And go to www.jolteffect.com. There's additional resources there, as I understand, Matt. That's right. Connect with you on LinkedIn. Follow your work around the DCM insights and obviously the new book that's coming. Is there anything I've missed there?
No, that's about it.
That's enough.
So, yeah,
We'll share those links, guys, and I'll also share a recording. But if you're curious about how we use books and authors to connect and grow leaders and teams, do head to readtolead.co.uk as well. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. But finally, a thank you to the audience. Don't forget to take some time to reflect and digest what you've absorbed. And thank you very much for your time. Have a great afternoon. Thanks a lot, Matt.
Okay, sir. Okay, bye-bye.